I'll start again. A man had 2 sons. The younger son told his father, "I want my share of your estate now, before you die." So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, this younger son packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land, and there he wasted all his money in wild living. About the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, "At home, even the hired servants have enough food to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, 'Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant.' So he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son.' But his father said to the servants, 'Quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and kill the calf we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast, for this son of mine was dead and now returned to life. He was lost, but is now found.' So the party began." I'm going to stop there just for now. This parable always reminds me of how gracious God is. And I want to approach this morning from my own personal walk and relationship with God. And in doing this, hopefully show how real and attainable love and forgiveness is. Because I think sometimes when people are up here preaching, and there's nothing wrong with that, sometimes you can just get caught up in the Bible verses and things like that. And I wanted to just come at a different angle this morning and just come from a personal point of view. At the ripe age of 20, like the prodigal son, I made a decision to walk away from my relationship with God. I'd got to the point where I wanted to explore the world and the things it had to offer. Now, this wasn't because of anything anyone had done or said. It was purely because growing up, I felt that my relationship with God was based on what I was being taught and told. It wasn't personal. And that's where I got to. But that's what I told my parents I wanted to do. But instead of deepening my relationship with God and trying to find him for myself, I got dragged away. And I always remember someone coming up with this analogy of a table. If you're on the table, it's always harder to be pulled off than pulled up. And it's a bit like, for me, I was on that table at that point in my life where I was like, I want to step off, but I want to stay on. But it was just easier for me to be pulled off because everything out there was like, come and try this, come and do this. You know, your friends are going out. Come, you know, it was a lot easier for me to be pulled off that table. But obviously, once that happened and my daily connections with God stopped, my relationship with him got more distant, and in time it was non-existent from my point of view. And a phrase springs to mind: the grass is always greener. And we all know that's not always the case. So I continued my life without God being in the center of it, exploring and doing things that were not in God's plan for me. So a bit like the prodigal son. He went off, he explored, he spent all his money drinking, partying, and in the end it ran out. During the time, though, and like the prodigal son's father, I'm sure I had parents and friends that were praying for me. as I went through that stage. And it breaks my heart, really, because as a parent now, I know how heartbroken they must have been. But sometimes, for me, I had to go through that to realise. And again, like the prodigal son, sometimes things happen for a reason, okay? And as a parent now, I understand to a degree the love and forgiveness involved. And this, in turn, makes me reflect on how much more God loves us. You know, we love our children, we love family. If we haven't got children, we've got people really close to us. But to think that God loves us like so much more than that, it's just amazing. So in further down in the parable, if we can put verses 17 to 19 up, we read the following. So it says here, when he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, even the hired servants have enough food to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against you and heaven and earth, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. So here we read that after going off with his inheritance and wasting it all, he finally came to his senses and set about returning home. Now that word home, to me, just brings comfort. For a lot of people, home doesn't have this feeling, but the home God gives us, the safety, I've got it written down and I've skipped ahead in my notes, so I'm already like messing myself up. So we come back to a safe place. We know we're accepted. We know God loves us unconditionally. And I just love that word home. It just makes me feel like, wow, just comfort. It's comforted. So now, I don't know about you, but as a child and a teenager, if I'd done something wrong, and I had that feeling of dread as I approached my parents, and I certainly didn't feel comfortable. So I'm sure as the son was approaching his father on the way back, he was really nervous about the reception he may receive. And we read that he was prepared to humble himself and become a servant in order to be accepted back and have a place to live. And that in itself shows you how low he'd got, that he was prepared to come back and humble himself into that place. And again, we read in verse 20, if we can put verse 20 up, please. It says, so he returned home to his father. And while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him and kissed him. What does the father do? Does he reject him? Does he stand there and say, well, actually, hang on a minute, go and sit down, I need to think about this? No. He runs to him. He embraces him. He's overjoyed to see him. There was no pause, no hesitation, no telling off. The father was just so happy that his son had returned. And that's what God is for us. There's no sin too big. There's no anything too big. God is here, waiting with his arms to embrace you. He wants us to realise what we've done wrong and ask for forgiveness. And he welcomes us back when we do that. Now, there may be people here this morning that think they've just gone too far. That how can God ever want me? How can God ever love and forgive me? I've done so much. There may be people in this room that know the release of God forgiving them, but this morning, please, I want to challenge you to think on your lives and just know that it doesn't matter what you've done. When I came to my senses, I knew that I could never turn my back on God again, no matter what life has thrown at me. God is my rock, that the grass isn't greener on the other side, despite going through tough situations. You know, we're in it with God. We're in it with somebody that loves us, somebody that embraces us when we've gone away, somebody that accepts us for everything. More importantly, in time, I knew that I was loved and totally forgiven by God. Now, that doesn't mean for some people that as soon as you pray to God and ask for forgiveness, that you're just necessarily going to feel that releasing. Some things take time. Forgiveness can take time. Healing takes time, because some of us may have gone through really tough times. And, you know, we need to accept that it takes time to heal. But God is there to forgive us now. You don't need to hold on to that. The repercussions of maybe some of our decisions we have to work through. But God loves you. And there's no, what's the word I want to use? There's no, conditions on that. There is no conditions. I had come home when I came back to God. And like the prodigal son, he came back, and his father, like our father, just accepted him, warts and all. Okay? So today, I just want to leave you with a challenge, and the music group are going to come back up with a bit of a response song. Are we willing to accept God's love and forgiveness? Because it's easy to say, I want to be forgiven, but are we willing to let go of it? Are we truly willing to move on from those things that we've maybe done, or, you know, just life? You know, life brings things, challenges. You know, are we willing to accept God's love? That whole question of God can't love me, he can. God can't forgive me, he can. And this morning he wants you to be loved and forgiven. Nothing is too big for God to forgive.